Hello, happy Wednesday. My name is Frances Gould. I am a current MFA student at Stony Brook Southampton, and I am so pleased to be moderating this conversation and these readings from E. Briskin and Luann Walker. So we're going to start with E. Briskin. E. Briskin is a queer Jew from Virginia. E has lived in Seattle for many years. We love a concise biography, and I'm very excited to hear E read from E's book, Orange, which I read a couple of months ago and would define it as a fragmented prose quasi-memoir book of poetry, playing with organization and flow and memory and emotion, and the relationship between humans and canines, and everything about that I loved. And I'm very excited to hear E read whichever part and in whichever order E will read from. So I will pass it over to E right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frances and Frank and Luann and all the mysterious YouTube people out there that are listening. And I'm just going to get started. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And here goes. Go on. Over, back, up, back up. It's not, dogs don't like to back up unless they're tugging. You died, and it has altered my stance, your stance, a sleeve, a rope. My dog died today. It was unexpected. 1 hour it was barking, then it stopped. I'm used to having something this size in my house, making noises, disturb. I have books and a speaker, blankets, bones on the floor. Why can't things keep going as they were? You died. It was an imposition. It's part playbow. My dog died today, definitely not yesterday. The driver was a kid and his text said, hamburgers, white bumper, red splatter, tufts of fur. Something large seized the withers of my soul. Forepaths bent, haunches up. My dog died today, mostly metaphorically. Not that she didn't, but that he hadn't been alive. I don't want to talk about results of electrocardiogram. Let's play 20 questions. Is it mineral? Is it mammal? No, don't answer. Is it a dog? You died. No, you didn't. You departed. The way dogs stalk up slowly, stealthily. My dog died today, allegorically, not that it didn't, but that it left the world to live. You died. On my conscience won't return you. It's not stealthy, not at all. My dog died today. My friends are tired of it. That fuzz-wiry rat thing, cosmos shine beast, mud-tailed drooler, was that even a dog? I don't know. Like Orson Welles in Touch of Evil, hiding plainly behind a slender pole. My dog died today, and tomorrow and Wednesday. 20 years ago, you are still dead. A dog in this construction is sort of conscious. Does this construct change the nature of my loss? Last night, I was reading more about you. Helenaeus classified species by teeth. My dog died today. I don't miss it. There's the cleanup to do. Then I'll go out. Dennett believes, if I'm understanding, that consciousness is materialist, made of functions, like if you turn on enough functions, selfhood happens. If I added a few teeth, would it change me? I have 31, you 42. 11 more. My dog died today, which is a thing that isn't true. It was more of an insect than a dog, which is a thing that isn't true. A thought is more an insect than a dog. But dogs have part of the awareness of a creature that knows itself. Daniel Dennett is a philosopher that I know of from, if I, born a woman, except I wasn't, I think I was, If I, from utero with utero, can become something else, is a dog such? My dog, who was a spider, died yesterday. I was restless at night. Its legs are hairy. I crushed it. I got up to get myself a little drink. When we talk of a dog, nearby dogs' ears prick up. They don't worry though, what we're saying about them, whether we think they are fetching or nice. A faraway possibility? Why can't I add teeth to meet Linnaeus? I could add a whatchamacallit organ to my nose. My dog, had it existed, would die today. I can tell because the sky looks like gray gum. Because wolves have to pull apart bodies, they drag them over snow or into forests, away from wolves. I would need to add olfactory receptors. Could a cell be implanted? 215 million? My dog. One experiment was vaguely pull this rope, pull that rope, pull this other one. The wolves all learned faster than the dogs. If only I had dogged ears. My dog died today. This isn't a Borscht Belt routine. It didn't dye its ears or its tuchus or a hind claw. It didn't forefoot over some Rubicon. It wasn't reborn as the mother of the father of all of Rome. I read those books a little. I mean, I read them. One of the advantages of wolves over dogs, a wolf can learn to pull ropes in a particular pattern. I want the kind you had, determined. My dog died today, and before my dog died, it had a few things to say. I don't know. If a dog read, what would it enjoy reading? Strategies for food procurement, signs the person's almost home, ways to lower a car's windows until they disappear. Which way did they go, down or up? My dog died today and not yesterday, not the day before, today, dead dog. I haven't read them. I haven't read them. Today I read them. My dog died today out of boredom. It was tired of hearing which day it died. Unless I stop now, stop writing, I'll finish writing before I finish reading. You finished. Here are books, not esoteric, about your life. The Other End of the Leash, Inside of a Dog, How to Speak Dog, What is a Dog, The Dog in Natural History, I Am Not a Brain, The Future of the Mind, Intuition Pumps. About time. Does a year feel the same to us? My dog died today. What does that mean even? My dog. To my left, two women are talking. They're friends with the person who has my name. Now I listen to them the way you would. I hear sound mumbles, then puppy, and then sound mumbles, and then puppy. Each puppy turns my head every time. Out the window of the coffee shop, a woman is walking her husky. My dog, which is to say a dog that lived on my couch, died today, which is to say a sofa dog stopped living. This happened today, which Samuel Johnson defines as the time of light that is happening in the present. He doesn't. Although a dog playing with a toy will still be focused on its owner, a hand holds the future. Jacket, treat. His hair and her cockles stand straight up. My dog died today, and all night I keep walking the curbs, grabbing dog shit, dangling collars from my hand. A dog is the opposite of a child, I'm thinking. A dog playing with a toy is a dog playing with a toy. Total focus, without bids for attention. You died. My dog died today, and it turns out that no dog is not the same thing as one dog no longer. A study suggests we become accustomed very quickly to the good in our lives. We feel bereft when that good passes on. This fur tuff, remove it. It fetches memories. Or will I miss it after I roll it away? Now he's leaving and says, bye-bye. He holds a muffin in his hands. When his dad stuffs the bear into the toy crate, he pays no mind. Today was so long ago. When your dog dies, the world decides to divide itself into two. the world of people who understand grief and those who don't. He tells me the bear is a baby that he saved from the toy crate. I look over. The crate holds 2 alligators. Brave guy. All those thoughts, twisted in grief. Where's your comeback soon now, heartbreak wine? He keeps putting it on his head and then yelling. He climbed on my head. He climbed on my head again. Was there a minute in the last 8 hours when I didn't think, dog, dog, when I didn't brush my hand out for your chest? Where's your ear pricked for the click of claws? Next table over at the shop where I'm writing, a little boy holding a small-eared, enormous-footed, brown-eyed bear. If I became one of your species, there's the matter of fur. Some of my friends have the mistaken impression that my dog must have been very large. First, this snippet from my memory. Is it memory that makes pain? Surely there's a dog version of Rogaine out there somewhere. Once, due to complicated circumstances, a dog I loved didn't see me for 2 years. This is long, and I'm thinking of how my fingers will respond. Repetition, fetch the ball, fetch, drop. Surely somewhere is a full body wig of fur. And still, when I entered his new apartment building, he smelled me through a door from the end of a long hall, and he howled his me howl, and he danced his me dance. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's how it went. To miss play is to miss joy. I miss keep working, my keep working dog. If I were you, my day would not change much. The same walking, some more napping, constant snacks. It's not that I don't believe in coincidence. It's that I believe in my dog. Last night, Lassie and I played her favorite game together. I might have more success finding catch partners. Is it easy to catch with a mouth? You really think your dog is the warmest, fuzziest? Your dog's half a dewclaw to my dog. A human craves immortality. A dog just wants to play, to hurtle itself against your person, to mock sink its teeth into a friend's fur, to catch the ball more times than you can throw. I saw a video once of a Chihuahua that peed during paw stands. My dog died and the gray squirrel sleeps unnoticed. And now I'm thinking about how much of socialization is an enthusiasm sink. I've forgotten what I was saying here. What day is this? The message it left on the lamppost. I'm tall. Thank you, and that's all.
Thank you so much for reading this in that order, in that way. It hits different every time. I guess that's all I can say. And I really loved it. And so now we'll turn to Luann. Luann Walker is the author of A Loss for Words, a memoir about growing up with deaf parents, a professor in the creative writing and literature program at Stony Brook Southampton in Manhattan. She has written for the New York Times Magazine, Oprah's Magazine, New York Magazine, and Esquire. She is the recipient of the Christopher Award, the Marguerite Higgins Reporting Award, an NEA grant, and a Rockefeller Foundation Award, and has been a MacDowell Fellow. Walker is founding editor-in-chief of TSR, the Southampton Review, a literary and arts journal, which is a great read. And I'm very excited to hear her read from a work that is in progress. It has not been published yet, and she will be signing, which I'm very excited to see as well. So I will hand it over to you, Luann.
Thank you, Frances. And thank you, That was just a wonderful reading, really just terrific. I'm so grateful to you, and we'll be talking more later. So this is an excerpt from something I'm writing now, as Frances said, and what I'm doing is doing research on deafness, new areas that I had not researched before, researching into what happened with the oralists and deaf people, and as Frances said, my mom and dad are deaf, as were my aunt and uncle. So in addition to researching what happened in education with deaf people, there was also what was happening medically and different treatments. My mother had spinal meningitis when she was 13 months old. And back then in 1931, when it hit her, they didn't have penicillin, they didn't have sulfamides and all the sorts of medicines to help with that. So she had inner ear imbalance. But what she saw when she went to deaf school, as my father saw also when he went to deaf school in Indiana, is that there were so many of the staff there, many who were wonderful, the faculty was wonderful, and then there were others who were really awful. My mother saw people getting kicked, their hair pulled, smacked around, and there was plenty of sexual abuse, as you can imagine, in an institution, basically. And I saw so much of what happened with my mother and father in the outside world and discrimination there. But what really hit me very hard as I was writing this memoir is how much impact there was from their own families and how they were taken advantage of. So this section is about my mother. So I'll read. When my mother was feeling the blueness of empty nest syndrome, she discovered quilting, putting together fabrics, creating patterns with such artistry. Drunkard's Path, flying geese, country spinning wheels, straightforward squares with somber Amish color choices. She loved picking hues that were dominant in someone's home and creating a special quilt. Working hours and hours every day, her delight in presenting someone with a gift was absolute joy to behold. Behind one corner in the back of the every quilt, she would write, "Crafted with love by Doris." Mom, Dad, and I were visiting my grandmother, my mother's mother, in Greencastle one spring day. We'd feasted on Mama's beef and dumplings and chocolate cream pie. We'd played euchre, the all-important Midwestern card game that drives people crazy, because when you see that a suit is no longer a suit, that the jack becomes the jack of hearts becomes the jack of diamonds. It's a really tough game, but we loved it. But as we were getting ready to leave, Mama brought out a shopping bag from her bedroom. "You made me this quilt," she quasi-spelled to my mom. "I don't need it. You take it back." Mom had chosen the colors to match my Mama's bedroom walls and had picked out Mama's favorite colors, her favorite flowers for patches. Mom blinked. "But I made it for you." "Oh, I don't need it," my grandmother said, feigning selflessness, half spelling, half leaning into Mom. My mother's own mother didn't understand what she was doing to her daughter, who had labored so hard just to please her. Several months later, Mom, Dad, and I went back to visit Mama. Smack in the doorway as we were leaving, after more beef and noodles, Mama said, "You know, I've had some terrible things happen in my life." I was interpreting for Mom and Dad, which I always did during these visits. Mama put one of her half smiles on. "My daughter was deaf. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me. My brother died, and my signing had melted into something smaller and smaller. My grandmother was telling her own daughter that she was the worst thing that ever happened to her in her life." In Mama's entryway, my back propping up the screen door, Mema went on to speak of her brother's suicide decades before, her argument-filled marriage to my grandfather, her mother's own father. My mom was standing directly across from me on the cement landing, clasping the black filigree fence. The moment Mema had said my own daughter, my hands had gone soft. They melted because I feared what was coming, because I knew as my mother's eyes moved back and forth between my mother's face, her mother's face, and my fingers, I had to convey exactly what was being said, yet as gently as possible. Interpreting to my mother that her mother thought she was the worst thing that ever happened to her? Mom's face was very quiet, very somber, as she took my arm and we headed toward the car. Then she did that extraordinary thing she did so well. She simply pushed aside her mother's words from her visual field and her thoughts. She wouldn't stay with the negative. Mommy squeezed my arm, clenched her tongue between her teeth, and pressed her cheek to mine as she patted my other cheek. And then the coo of her voice came from her throat. In the car on the way back to Indianapolis, Mom turned around to me. Her eyes were glassy. That's Mama. Mom had seen how quiet I was. When I was a girl, I collected salt and pepper shakers. Because I was away at school, they stayed home in Fillmore. One set was corn cobs, another a devil and an angel, another a pair of shoes, another a bull and a bullfighter, another a Dutch boy and girl. Then one time when I came home from deaf school, I couldn't find them in my room. Oh, I threw them away, my mother told me. And now I'm going to skip to the end, because if anything, my mother was resilient. Mom and I went to the supermarket once, and while she studied the breakfast cereals, I dashed over to the next aisle to grab a jar of mustard. But when I walked back around the end of the aisle, there was a woman behind Mom. Her knuckles were white on the cart's handles. Excuse me, no response from Mom. The woman was pulling her cart back in order to shove it into my mother. I could see it. Excuse me. She's deaf, I shouted, starting to run. Mom saw my signs and whipped around to see the glowering woman, whereupon I caught the side of my mother's face, flashing her most beatific smile. Mom nodded at the woman and pointed to her own ear. Yes, deaf. The angry woman deflated as fast as a balloon stuck by a pin, yanking her cart back in retreat. Mom turned to me, her grin metamorphosing into something so impish. And then Mom batted her eyelashes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luann. That was really beautiful. And I'm so grateful that you shared this piece of work that is in progress with us and all of the people watching on the interweb. And I look forward to reading the final version. So I think we'll move into the question and answer, more conversation part of Writer Speak Wednesday. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to put them in the YouTube chat, and I will read them to E or to Luann or to both or to just, the general conversation. But I'll keep monitoring that. I guess I have a few questions lined up. Luann, your piece is definitely more explicitly memoir, and E, I'm not sure that you would define Orange as such, or if it's relevant or important for us to describe either piece as like specifically memoir. And I'm definitely interested to hear your opinions on that. But I'm curious, to hear from both of you about what you think the role memoir plays in our era right now, which is defined so much by both, our social media fueled quest for like individualism and identity and setting ourselves apart from the herd, but also, but also in an era that's defined by like reaching for global community and for finding various communities that are, nearby and in our localities, kinds of networks and forums that we're increasingly part of. And so I think that the memoir and all literature in general really responds to both of those ends of the spectrum. And I'm curious to hear how you respond to that spectrum and whether you think that memoir has a particularly important role to play in navigating these two very extreme things that are both very prominent right now. So whoever wants to start, and then we can just talk about it. So Luann, yeah.
No, take it away.
Me? Yeah.
That's kind of a hard one. That's a big question.
Yeah.
I guess, I think there really is some truth to, it's hard because I don't want to sort of collapse like the world down to an individual, but I do think that the specifics of one individual in some ways are more likely to help you understand everything than vagueness, right? So if you really know kind of one person's life or one person's thoughts, that will help you to understand your own thoughts, where you differ from that person's thoughts. So I don't know, it just seemed like a paradox though, that the more personal you get, the more universal you get, but also not. The more personal you get, the less universal. So I have not answered the question.
I think it's a question without any sort of intent for an answer, but just it's a curiosity that I have and that I think a lot of people might have.
Very well put. And it's true, we all take away what we need at the moment we need it. So we come to a work and, oh, it's talking about family, or it's talking about the dearest beings in our lives. So there's so much that's so complicated. So I loved your answer, E. I just think that when I go to a work, I am looking for something that increases my understanding, but also gives me other tools in forwarding other work. And that's very selfish as a writer, frankly. But I think that's what a lot of us do, certainly in MFA programs as writers. And I also think that no work is in a vacuum. But I do know that when I first started writing memoir, which was a long time ago, putting down that word I was so hard. Oh my goodness. Nobody wrote I. So there's been a real evolution, I think. And there's been an expansion of the ways one can express personal essay and memoir. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, in that sort of navigation between our individual experiences, which do reflect our communities, we also want to be reflective of our communities in our work. I don't know that that's, like a categorical imperative, but I do think that, we're so shaped by, the ways that we grew up, or, our dogs, or, our cities, or our, academic communities. And I think it's interesting having both of you in this conversation because, E and your biography, state yourself as a queer Jew, as am I. And Luann, you are, from the deaf community, even though you are not deaf yourself, but I think the community is just so boisterous and beautiful. And I think what an honor to be part of that community. And so I am curious whether whether you could speak to, those two individual experiences. If you feel any sense of necessity to bring in those communities into your work. I think, Luann, you definitely do this in a more explicit way, given that you're writing about your parents and your experience being a coda. And then it wasn't extremely, present for me in reading Orange, that you were writing about, queerness and Judaism, but I think that as a queer Jew, I definitely took away, experiences from that felt similar to my own or my friends. And, it's such a solitary experience writing, but I think that these communities are so present with us, as the Greek chorus behind us as we're typing away or writing away. So I'm just curious whether you, feel these communities, actively influencing you as you're in the process of writing, or if not, what is that like? What is it like to just kind of shut yourself away from that world that we are so deeply a part of, to focus on something that is so singular and introspective?
Let's see. I guess, it's funny. I think if I do sort of like having no bio as a bio. And I actually was thinking that I felt I had a responsibility, given the book that I had written, that I wanted to say okay, this is who I am, just so that people maybe who share my identity could just relax a little bit, if possible, and and maybe see themselves, but also just there's things there that I wouldn't have rented I wouldn't have felt okay to write if this hadn't been, my identity. But I think it's impossible to write without sort of the Greek chorus or the queer chorus, I think in one's head. But I did try, I think I felt at times a pull to be more explicit, and then I didn't want to, because when you're living your life, you're just living your life. You're not running around talking about who you are in context to everyone all the time. It's just happening. And I wanted the book to feel that way, that, I didn't have to run around remarking on, I think actually running around remarking on how queer Jewish I am would be great too. But in this case, I didn't really want to. I just wanted to sort of have this character who obviously has some similarities with me, to just be in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do remember that, in Orange, the biography page is blank or not blank. There are no words on the page, I should say. And, I think that there is something that just resonates, in the nomenclature that is used, and the flow of language that comes out, that just invites a reader in, whether or not they, have some sort of congruence to, that part of your identity. And I think to not write any, to not have any words written on the biography page is a, very interesting choice. And I, very much in admiration of it for, because it does invite more people in, because, nobody knows, what sort of definitions could be associated with this writer, and therefore everybody sort of feels maybe some sort of invitation to read and associate and connect with different parts that are on the page, and different fragments of experiences. And the matter of fur, it feels that feels to me very Jewish and very queer, but it could feel like a whole lot. It could feel very masculine, and or a topic of masculinity, or a topic of femininity, or a topic of politics or anything really. And I think that that is just, it's like the lens that you bring to it, which allows other people, to everybody really, to see whatever they want to see or can see or don't necessarily know that they want to see or need to see, if that makes any sense. But yeah, so I think that, sort of breaking down the barrier between the individual and the readership is really, really remarkable. And Luann, I'd love to, hear your response to this conversation. And I know that we have a question from Paul.
So my whole life, I've never been completely hearing culture or completely deaf culture, but both. And so it's a tightrope walk to be writing about the deaf world, because I don't want to be proclaiming that I know everything about deafness, but my husband would say, why do you tell me every time when you go from one room to the next? And I said, oh, it's because when I grew up, people couldn't hear that you were walking from one room to the next. So you always had to tell somebody you were going to the kitchen or whatever. But one of the advantages that I really have had growing up with deaf parents is that as an interpreter, which I do on the side, I've been in so many different situations. I've interpreted in prison. I've interpreted women giving birth. I've interpreted for arguments between children and parents. I've interpreted every single facet of life that I can possibly imagine. And I've been blocked so many times by people who didn't want somebody interpreting, even though they didn't realize that the deaf person needed to have a full understanding, an in-depth understanding. So it's that go-between that I've really had to work at. But there are deaf people in every country. There are deaf people in every walk of life. There are deaf people every gamut of society in the entire world. So for me, it's a real advantage to have had those opportunities to just see how people behave and to understand and just try to be a bridge. And that's what I'm doing with this memoir, trying to just be the bridge without saying I know everything about this or that, because I don't fully understand what it is in either camp. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways you're describing what it is to be a writer, to be an intermediary between, the parts of individual experiences that are not necessarily so easy to communicate or articulate in regular, interactions with other humans, but then putting it on the page or signing it or just communicating it in a different way beyond casual conversation is, I think, what we're all trying to do here, right? And I think that, as an interpreter, that it seems to be a similar goal, similar endpoint in mind, but obviously with a different medium, your hands versus the page. Yeah, no, I love these answers. So there are two questions in the chat from two of my professors, so very happy to see that. So I'll start with Paul's question, which is for E. So E, would you describe the process of what I imagine as tessellation, like arranging tiles in a mosaic roughly, working with the numbers, the lines, stanzas, refrains, riffs? I think I stressed the wrong part of that sentence because he's asking, would you describe that process?
I'm hoping I'm even remembering what tessellation means appropriately.
I'm not sure I know either, but I have an image of it, but I don't know like the definition.
Yeah, me too. But I think I wouldn't, just because the way I wrote the book, it got moved around a lot. But when I first wrote it, tiling, okay, good. I think thank you for that. I think I do understand what tessellation is. It was really it was a little bit more like a random throwing out followed by a very painstaking process of refinement. So a lot of the things that are on the same page are just there randomly, or at least were initially there randomly. And so I chose what to make less random, what to keep. But there wasn't that much assembly, because when I first finished the book, it was sort of like it was. And when I had to move things over, it was pretty crazy. So there were times when it was more like, oh, I wish I could come up with a good analogy for it. But basically, I had sort of two streams going this way. And so sometimes I would just like, okay, where? Okay, there.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who hasn't read Orange, I so strongly recommend it. It's, yeah, there it is. I don't have my copy with me, but it is really just an exercise for the brain, but a fun it's play and exercise for the brain to read, down the page and then across the page and then across and then across and then down and up and all over. And suddenly it is, like a mosaic, a mandala in a way. And it tells, I think, a greater truth, because that is how not just the, process of grief works is, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 20 steps up and down the x-axis, or the y-axis or the z-axis. And, it's such a, I think, brilliant way of conveying such a unique and individual and universal experience. So, and I'm so glad that you shared the screen so that people who haven't read it can see how it's formulated and structured.
I also love the numbers that you saw on the screen as he was reading. I mean, it's just so brilliantly done in that way that you go throughout and you see, oh, this refers to this. I just love that.
Yeah, and the footnotes also. I mean, you didn't read those aloud, but what an incredible way to play on something that we usually just ignore on the page, because oftentimes they are quite dull. But yours were not. And a lot of times the footnotes are not dull. So Molly has some questions, Molly Gaudry. I'll start with one for Luann. So Luann, are there elements of your research for this new book that have surprised you? Is the research process difficult? Is it stimulating, joyful, boring, the gamut?
A lot of it is upsetting when I think more about Alexander Graham Bell and his relationship to deaf people. He had a deaf mother and a deaf wife, and he just barred signing and just delayed so much for deaf people for so many decades. So before, I won't go into all the details, but there were tons of people who were running deaf schools, who were supervisors, teachers, and they all lost their jobs once Bell and his cohorts got, and Bell was an amazing inventor, don't get me wrong, but that was really upsetting to understand how much damage had been done to deaf people, to their pride, to everything else there. So some of the research is really upsetting. And then putting together certain aspects that I had not understood about my own family, how my relatives had mistreated my mother and father. Then there's a wonderful documentary about deaf young men who went to a private school, a deaf school in Minnesota, and the priest would bring them to his country cabin and abuse them for years. And it wasn't until they were in their 40s and started saying, hey, we've got to do something, that they were able to stand up for themselves. So all those aspects are really tough. And then quite honestly, interpreting for my dad and seeing what still happens with people discriminating, what I've seen with other deaf people he knows in Florida where he lives, interpreting in the middle of the night for a helicopter ride, for an emergency, and just seeing how people were just mistreating a deaf woman. So all those things have been really heart-wrenching, but I just understand more and more in depth. And then to understand how my mother and father were, okay, this has happened. We're going to fight for this. We're going to fight for that. My sister one time was up high she worked for the state of Indiana, and she was high up in her office, and she looked down and she saw my dad, who was in his 70s, with a picket sign in front of the state capitol, protesting the closure of the Indiana School for the Deaf. So, I see the activism in my father, especially, and some in my mother. And I understand more and more about why it is so crucial, even though they didn't even know some of that history. So thank you, Molly, for that question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also add to that. I think that you wrote a Loss for Words, your memoir, in the 80s. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
It's still approved. Hey.
as it should be. And I'm curious, whether just like the internet and has allowed you to access more of these stories and more of this information that maybe wasn't present, when you were working on your first book.
Well, so yes, some of the internet, but more of it is actually talking to people who are researching in the field. So I went to my dad's it was the 175th anniversary of the Indiana School for the Deaf, and Dad and I went for the reunion. And then I was able to interview people who were doing neuropsychological research afterward. And there's another neuroscientist who's deaf himself, who's actually exploring how it's different to have Alzheimer's when you're deaf than when you're not. So I'm writing about those aspects. And I couldn't do that if deaf people weren't more in contact. So the internet has really joined people together. I mean, my dad talks with his friends all over the country all the time on his video phone. So that's so great, And at 95, that he is such a tech whiz, hey, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, no, I think that just the fact of the deaf community having more of a platform and a forum, not necessarily being the internet, but just the way that we interact with the deaf community in general, it must allow for more openness that is, I imagine, really essential to what you're working on right now. Those stories that might not have been able to have been told prior. Yeah, thank you. Another question from Molly is for E. So her question is, E, earlier you said you tend to read from orange page by page versus in order, as in the numerical order. What's the difference for you between the two ways of moving through this text?
That's a good question. And also thank you, Molly, for asking questions. I guess the difference is, well, I really vastly prefer it by page, because I think when I read it by number, I feel more like I'm stuck in one moment or one narrative or one train of thought. And I think really what's interesting about it is the juxtaposition. I do like reading it both ways, but since today was the first time that I read it, one way and then the other way, and it's just, I get a little bored reading it by number, and by page. I'm also, I really was very much trying to compose each page, and so I like the feeling of that composition. I guess that's it.
And can I say, E, the musicality of your voice is just so wonderful. Listening to it, the beauty of the way you read is just extraordinary.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think that musicality, it brings out part of the narrative that I think transcends whichever order you're reading from. Yeah, I also picked up on that, and yeah.
Thank you.
And variety is the spice of life. So I wish that there were more books that we could reread in different ways. I think we all pick up different notions and ideas and questions from rereading different texts over and over again. But what a gift it is to be given like the key to understanding the text in any way, just as it's written on the page.
Thank you. May I ask a question of Luann?
Yeah.
I was just wondering if she would talk more about the project she's working on now. Like I realized I wasn't sure how much was sort of memoir and how much was a history, or what are the problems of trying to merge those things together. Anything you'd like to tell me, I'd be really interested to hear.
Well, almost like you, I incorporate the research with the narrative. I think that that's really an important, those are important elements to put together, because for me, I can't understand the history of deafness unless I know certain facts. I didn't know that Helen Keller was got married, and then they told her she couldn't be married, and they forced her to annul her marriage because they just her mother and basically Anne Sullivan, who was wonderful, said, "Oh no, you can't get married." Well, why? Because then she wouldn't be earning as much money for them. So there are certain aspects that I just keep understanding more and more in depth. So for me, I can't separate the research from the emotion. But I try not to overwhelm the emotion. I try not to be upset or angry, just juxtaposing aspects. But that's a lot of what you do, E. You juxtapose so much in such intriguing ways. How do you think about that juxtaposition?
I don't know how I think about it. I guess, well, to take a step back, I think, I've written a lot of just sort of plain poems in my life, and it took me a long time to realize that occasionally the poems that were really just completely interior were good ones, but for the most part, the ones that were good were the ones where I was bringing in something else, and when that something was specific. But then if I try to sort of write just about the specifics, then it can lack poetry for me or lack emotion. And so I think I was consciously trying to sort of do both things. And I was actually thinking that the piece that you read, this is sort of different, but I felt so much, I felt a lot of anger, right? Hearing some of the things that you were describing. And then I was thinking about the specifics of that anger, and then how it was for the anger of an individual, you in a situation, but then it was for, your parents. And then it was also, of course, to move further out for just the global situation of the way that people who are deaf are treated by the hearing. And it's interesting to feel all of that. And I was sort of thinking about how much just historical weight individuals have on them, and how much weight you had on you there. Like, you're just a kid. Anyway, I really appreciated hearing all that.
Oh, thank you, E. I really loved hearing you change what you've done, which we can do as writers. And every juxtaposition just changes so much. And actually this afternoon, I spent a lot of time moving things around, trying to figure out, oh, this should come first. No, this should come first. And collapsing this and expanding that. So, and my friend Riley down here on the floor he's been fascinated by the process today.
Excellent. He's been a great help.
Riley's a dog, I'm assuming, or
Riley the dog, yes.
Riley dog, or
he's black and white, right? I caught a glimpse.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that's a really lovely way to conclude this rendition of Writers Speak Wednesday. Unless there are any closing thoughts, I don't see any other questions in the forum, but
Frances, thank you for the way you handled this. It was just terrific. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It was an honor, and I'm so happy that I was asked. And again, I would just encourage everybody to read both Luann's work and E's work. cannot recommend more highly. And yes, there it is again. I'm jealous. I don't have my
I'm embarrassed.
true. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful to meet you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I believe that there will be another Writer Speak Wednesday next week with I forget who, and that's really embarrassing, but it's on some flyer somewhere, which I created with my very horrible graphic design skills, but or lack thereof. And yeah, so I think that's it. Frank, if you want to wrap us up.
Thank you.